Hello, welcome back. We are on part 4 of Ursula K LeGuin's book, No Time to Spare. How far we're getting? Part 4 is called Rewards. Starts out with the chapter, The Circling Stars, the Sea Surrounding, Philip Glass, and John Luther Adams, April 2014. Every year one of the Portland Opera Company's productions. Every year, one of the Portland Opera Company's productions is sung by the singers in the company's outstanding training program. In 2012, it was Philip Glass's short opera Galileo Galilei. There is a splendor to young voices different from the patina of the experienced singer, and these performances always have an extra charge of tension and excitement. The bold, beautiful, intricately simple set, all circles and arcs and moving light on different planes, was, I believe, from the Chicago premiere in 2002. The conductor was Ann Manson. The first scene shows us Galileo, old, blind, and alone. From there, the story follows a reverse spiral through time, revolving back lightly and ceaselessly through his trial, his triumphs, his discoveries, to the last scene where a little boy named Galileo sits hearing an opera about Orion and the dawn and the circling planets written by his father, Vincenzo Galilei. It is all borne along and buoyed up by the endlessly repetitive and ever-changing music, always spiraling, never resting, and yet moving with the slow majesty of the great orbits without reference to any beginning or end in a vast joyous continuity. It moves, it moves, it moves, y pur si mueve. I was rapt from the first moments, and by the last scene I could scarcely see the stage for tears of delight. We went back the next night and had the same radiant experience. There is now a recording of the Portland Opera performance, Orange Mountain Music, OMM 10091. I have listened to this with deep pleasure and will listen to it again. But I am still certain that the true power of opera, and certainly this opera, is in the actual production, the immediate live presence of the singers and the interaction of their voices and the music with the sets, lighting, action, movements, costumes, and audience to create a global, irreproducible experience. This is how all the great opera composers have understood their undertaking. Recording, film, all are wonderful instruments of virtuality, catch only the shadow, recall only a memory of that lived experience, that moment of real time. An opera is a preposterous proposition. It's almost incredible that any production of any opera ever comes off. To a lot of people, of course, it doesn't. Tolstoy was one. Philip Glass's musical is also somewhat preposterous. To a lot of people, it isn't musical at all. Some of his pieces sound mechanical, even perfunctory to me. But having been deeply moved years ago by the film Koyaanisqatsi, and by his Gandhi opera Satyagraha on stage in Seattle, I am always ready to hear what Glass is up to now. For Galileo, he had a brilliant librettist, Mary Zimmerman, and rose to the challenge. Wow, there are a lot of words in this book I don't know. The words and action of the piece are luminously intelligent. They go to the heart of what Galileo's life and thought mean to us in terms of knowledge, courage, and integrity, both scientific and religious. Yet they linger also on the humanity of the man who rejoiced in his daughter, rejoiced in thought and argument, rejoiced in his work and his great discoveries, and for his public reward got shame, silence, and exile. It is a grand story and a dark one, quite right for opera. I found Galileo completely beautiful. I think it as beautiful in its way as Gluck's Orfeo is in its. Neither is so dramatically and emotionally huge as much 19th century opera. Neither is so dramatically and emotionally huge as much 19th century opera, but both are complete whole, every element in them entering into a ravishing totality. Galileo has an intellectual grandeur rare in opera, but even that is in the service of making pleasure true pleasure, the pleasure given by something noble, thoughtful, deeply moving, and delightful. And this was my first 21st century opera. What a marvelous start. Just 2 years later, this March, the Seattle Symphony brought a concert to Portland that included a piece, Become Ocean. They commissioned, and bravo for doing so, from the composer John Luther Adams. There are too many composers named John Adams. The one from San Francisco is better known at present, and I found his music increasingly disappointing ever since the curiously brainless and vapid opera Nixon in China. Living in Alaska, John Luther Adams is still marginal not only to mainland America, but to mainstream fame. But I believe that will change as his music is heard. For Become Ocean, the orchestra is divided on stage into 3 groups with differing instrumentations. All 3 play continuously, each following its own pattern of tempo, volume, and tonality. Now one group and now another dominates, the ebb and flow of each interpenetrating with the others like currents in the sea. Sometimes they are all on the ebb. Their crescendos overlap until a vast, deep tsunami of music swells over the hearers, overwhelming, and then subsides again. The harmonies are complex, and there are no tunes as such, but there is no moment in the work that is anything less than beautiful. The hearer can surrender to the surrounding sound as a ship surrenders itself to the waves, as the great kelp forests surrender to the movement of the currents and the tides, as the sea itself surrenders to the gravity of the moon. When the deep music ebbed away at last, I felt that I'd come as near as ever I will to indeed becoming ocean. We stood up to applaud, but not many people did. Portland audiences tend to leap to their feet automatically for a soloist, but rise more selectively for a mere orchestra. I think the response was to some extent puzzled, maybe bored. Become Ocean is 45 minutes long. A man near us was growling about it never ending, while I was wishing it never had. Edgar Varèse's Désert came next in the program, a piece that skillfully and faithfully obeys the modernist mandates of discord. Maybe we have at last worked through the period when serious music had to seek anti-harmony and strive to shock the ear. Neither Glass nor Adams appears to be following a program dictated by theory. Like Gluck or Beethoven, they're innovative because they have something new to say and know how to say it. They are obedient only to their own certainties. I came away from both these concerts marveling that while our republic tears itself apart and our species frantically hurries to destroy its own households, yet we go on building with vibrations in the air and in the spirit, making this music, this intangible, beautiful, generous thing. And words. Rehearsal, April 2013. Sitting in on a rehearsal is a strange experience for the author of the book the play is based on. Words you hear in your mind's ear 40 years ago in a small attic room in the silence of the night are suddenly said aloud by living voices in a bright lit, chaotic studio. People you thought you'd made up, invented, imagined are there, not imaginary at all, solid, living, breathing, and they speak to each other, not to you, not anymore. What exists now is the reality those people build up between them, the stage reality that is ungraspable and fleeting as all experience. but more charged than most experience, with intense presence and passion, until suddenly it's over. The scene changes, the play ends. Or in a rehearsal, the director says, "That was great, let's take it again from where Genli comes in." And they do. The reality that vanished appears again. They build it up between them, the doubts, the trust, the misunderstanding, the passion, the pain. Actors are magicians. All stage people are magicians, the whole crew, on stage and behind it, working the lights and painting the set and all the rest. They collaborate methodically. Ritual must be methodical because it must be complete, in working magic. And they can do it with remarkably unlikely stuff. No cloaks, no magic wands, or eyes of new or bubbling alembics. Essentially, they do it by limiting space and moving and speaking within that space to establish and maintain a secondary creation. Watching a rehearsal makes that especially clear. At this point, some weeks before first night, the actors wear jeans and t-shirts. Their ritual space is marked out with strips and bits of tape on the floor. No set, their only props are a couple of ratty benches and plastic bowls. Harsh lights glare steadily down on them. 5 feet away from them, people are moving around quietly, eating salad out of a plastic tub, checking a computer screen, scribbling notes. But there, in that limited space, the magic is being worked. It takes place. There, another world comes into being. Its name is Winter, or Gethin, and look, the king is pregnant. Someone Named Dolores, October 2010. A sentence in a story has been troubling me. The story by Zadie Smith was in the New Yorker of October 11. It's in the first person, but I don't know whether it's fiction or memoir. Many people don't even make the distinction. Now that memoirs take the liberties of fiction without taking the imaginative risks, and fiction claims the authority of history without assuming the factual responsibilities, to my mind, the I of a memoir or personal essay is a very different matter from the I of a story or novel. But I don't know if Zadie Smith sees it that way. So I don't know whether she's speaking as a character in fiction or as herself when towards the end of her tale of a surprisingly unrepaid loan to a friend, she says, "The first check came quickly but sat in a pile of unopened mail because these days I hire someone to do that." The implicable editor in my hindbrain promptly inquired, "You hire someone not to open the mail?" I silenced the meddling reptile, but the sentence continued to bother me. These days, I hire someone to do that. What's wrong with that? Well, I guess it's the someone. Someone is no one. The nameless nobody hired to answer the mail of a somebody with a name. So at this point, I'm beginning to hope that the story is fiction, and thus the narrator is not Zadie Smith, because this doesn't sound like the voice of a writer highly sensitive to class and color prejudices. It reminds me, in fact, of the dean's wife, when I was a lowly assistant professor's wife who couldn't leave my housekeeper out of her conversation for 5 minutes. She was in such a state of admiration of herself for having the grand house that required keeping and the housekeeper to keep it. But that was silly, naive, like Mr. Collins continually mentioning my patron, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. The statement, "These days I hire someone to do that," has a harsher ring to it. And so what? Why shouldn't a highly successful writer hire help and say so? And what skin is it off my nose? Envy, of course, in the first place. I am envious of people who hire a servant with perfect assurance of righteousness. I envy self-confidence, even as I dislike it. Envy coexists only too easily with righteous disapproval. Indeed, perhaps the two nasty creatures live off of each other. And then annoyance. There's an "of course" implied in "I hire someone to do that," and there's no "of course" about it. But people think there is, and this kind of talk encourages them to think so, which annoys me. It's a widespread illusion. A writer, a successful writer, a real writer, doesn't do her own mail. She has a secretary to do it, as well as helpers, amanuenses, researchers, handlers, Lord knows what, maybe an editor's hole in the East Wing, like the priest's hole in old British houses. I imagined writers commonly had secretaries a century ago. Henry James did, sure enough, but Henry James was not exactly your average writer, right? Virginia Woolf didn't. Among writers I know personally, only one has a secretary to do mail. To me, it seems a perquisite of the extremely successful and of a magnitude of success that daunts me. Privacy to be with my family and do my work was of the first importance to me. So when I began to need help answering my letters, I found it extremely difficult to convince myself that I needed it badly enough to justify my hiring someone, bringing a stranger into my study, setting myself up as a boss. I always had trouble calling Dolores my secretary. It sounded so pompous, echoes of my housekeeper. If I had to speak of her to strangers, I said her name or my friend who does mail for me. But I knew that this latter phrase was one of the mildly devious devices by which we handle guilt, the ways we try to reintroduce humanity into the relationship of hirer and hired, which inevitably, to whatever slight a degree, involves inequality, the raising up of one and degradation of the other. Democracy, by strenuously denying the fact of inequality, does enable us, to a surprising extent, to act as if it didn't exist, but it does exist and we know it. So our job is to keep the inequity of power as small as possible and refuse to let our common humanity be reduced, however slightly, even by a careless word, by an assertion of unequal worth. My envy of writers who hire a person to handle their mail and annoyance at people who assume that I have such help are really quite mild, but they are painful now because I did have someone, but I lost her. Dolores Rooney, later Dolores Pander, was my helper and dear friend. 30 years ago or so, I finally got up my courage and asked around for a professionally competent and discreet person to give me a hand with my letters, which were getting beyond me. Our mutual friend Martha West, who had worked with Dolores as a secretary in an office, recommended her. She was then working as a manager agent for a dance company. We rather nervously gave it a try. I had never dictated anything to anybody outside beginning French courses, where you very slowly and carefully read a dictée in French to the students, who very slowly and inaccurately write it down. Dolores had taught herself shorthand and was a whiz at it, a skill now, I suppose, almost entirely lost, and she'd taken a lot of dictation from lots of dictators. She coached me in composing a letter orally and encouraged me with praise. She was an excellent teacher. And she'd worked and lived with artists, painters, dancers, and was used to artistic temperamental peculiarities, having a few of her own. We got to doing letters quickly and easily, and I soon began to draw on her as collaborator in composing the letters, what to say and how to say it. Does that sound all right? What if you said this or instead of that? What on earth am I going to write to the man who sent me a 600-page manuscript about fairies on Venus? This one's a whiner. You don't have to answer him. Dolores was always better than me at kind answers to kooks, and she was tough-minded too, and encouraged me not to answer a letter that was troublingly weird or made unreasonable demands. She got to be so good at replying to the eternally repeated questions that I could have handed her a letter and just say, "Idea for cat wings," and the true tale of how I happened to think of cats with wings was already in her computer. Though she varied it slightly according to her mood and the age of the inquirer, she had a gracious, graceful tone in discouraging problematic requests by explaining why I couldn't personally reply just now. She covered for me beautifully. She loved to answer children's letters, even when they were the mechanical kind some teachers make kids write. The open kindness and generosity of her spirit lent all my correspondence a quality it would never have had without her collaboration. She never came more than once a week, usually only once every 3 or 4 weeks. I do the most urgent business correspondence and let the rest and the fan mail pile up. She got a computer before I did, and it eased her work a great deal. When I got one, it didn't make much difference at first, but when email really got going, I began to be able to deal with all the real business myself. Still, Dolores and I together handled non-urgent business, the fan letters from readers, and what we called the gimmies, the letters everybody who becomes visible to the public gets, asking you to do this, give to that, endorse this book, speak at that good cause, etc. Even if you can't possibly say yes to them, most such letters are well-intentioned and deserve a civil no. Dolores said no thank you in every possible way, always politely. It was a great burden off me. She said that the gimmies were boring, but just various enough to be entertaining too. As for fan mail, letters from readers have always come to me on paper only, my crude but effective way of keeping the volume down. The letters people write me, often with pen and ink or in pencil, crayon, glitter, and other media if they're children, are ever amazing, giving me immense pleasure and reward, but they are also never ending. I knew there was no way I could handle the load if I tried to read and answer them on my website or on email. But I have always felt that such letters deserve a reply, however brief, and for years Dolores was my invaluable aid in answering them. We loved each other as friends, but didn't have extensive contact outside our work sessions. She was a busy woman. She soon became the writer Jean Aule's secretary 4 days a week, and was agent and manager for her husband, the painter Hank Pander. When her parents grew old and sick, she looked after them, and late in life she adopted and brought up her granddaughter. Our friendship was expressed mostly during and in our working relationship. I always looked forward to Dolores coming, and we always spent half the time talking, catching up. Once when I was scared by a stalker, she and Hank gave me wonderful immediate support. As the years went on, she seemed to grow shyer and more withdrawn from her friends than she had been. I do not know why. She told me once that she liked coming to work with me because we laughed together. Her computer began to get out of date and her life was complicated by various issues. Her energy was being overtried. She couldn't or didn't want to figure out how to help me with e-correspondence the way she did with paper mail, which she took home along with dictated answers or suggested notes for me. So I came to do all the email and most of the letters, leaving her only some gimmies and no thank yous in those fan letters that needed only acknowledgement. Dolores' joy in life had been visibly flagging for a long time when she was diagnosed last year with cancer. At first it seemed local and curable, but proved to be metastasizing. It killed her in a few months. There was a brief and lovely respite or remission for a few weeks late in her illness, when we were able to visit with her quite often and laugh together as we used to laugh. Then the cruel disease closed in again. She died a few months ago, attended with great tenderness by her husband. I find it extremely hard to talk about people I love who have died. I can't now make a proper tribute to that complex and beautiful woman, or say more than that I miss her friendship in every way. Without her, I've had to give up the effort to answer fan mail, at least temporarily. As for the gimmies, some of them get answered, some of them don't. I suppose I could hire someone to do that, but I doubt that I will. I can't put my heart into it. Sad note to end on, but my battery is yet again full, and I think I need to go get some water. So we'll pick up again. We're almost done. Hope you have a good day.